Hi folks, welcome to the 21st century cut of the second Sci-Fi Scavenger viewer survey of your favourite science fiction books of all time. Each respondent to the survey picked their top 10 science fiction books. They ranked them in order, and then I gave each one a point value depending on where it ranked. So if it was their first choice book, I gave it 10 points. The second choice book, I gave it 9 points, all the way down to their 10th choice book, I gave 1 point. And then those points were used to stack up the rankings. And then I've taken a cut of only those books that were published since the year 2000, and including the year 2000 for the sake of round numbers. So in at number 50 is Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson, and this is a generation ship tale, and as is nearly always the case in my experience, something has gone wrong. So we get a nice glimpse of what life on this generation ship through the eyes of the daughter of the captain, if I remember rightly, and there are a number of important decisions that need to be made along the way. Do they stick or twist? At number 49 is Look to Windward by, of course, Ian M. Banks, and this is among my favourite of the culture novels, and this one tells the story of life on the orbital Masak. It's also a tale of revenge being a dish best served cold, and there's some really great aliens in this book, plus of course as usual culture, special circumstances, shenanigans, and as I say, some really nice descriptions of life on an orbital, and like I say, one of my favourites. Next is a memory called Empire by Arcadia Martin, and a sort of a Byzantine star-spanning empire. We follow the tale of an ambassador from a relatively small space station who is trying to navigate her way around the mysteries of court and the capital of the empire, because her predecessor has been murdered, she thinks, and she's equipped with an incomplete memory chip of his memories the last time it was downloaded back at the station. And between her and the persona that goes with that memory chip, they try and solve the crime. A bunch of other things besides. But these books get, I think, an unreasonable amount of hate for some reason. I quite like them. In at 48 is The Three Body Problem, first of the trilogy, of course. And this one tells the tale of the Trisolarans and their decision to invade Earth and to control our response to that via something, I forget what they're called. Not the strongest of the trilogy, and people criticise it for being a bit dry and the characters for being a bit wooden, and I put most of that down to the translation, but also just from it being from a completely different perspective. We don't often read Chinese science fiction in the West, or certainly we didn't when this first came out. At number 46 is The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which I have read but I don't have a copy of. I think I must have sacrificed that in a shelf cull at some point earlier this year, and I must have decided that I was probably not going to read it again. So this is climate fiction. Robinson posits a world in which things are rapidly going pear-shaped. There's an international consensus to set up this Ministry for the Future, which tries to make policy decisions based on what would our grandchildren and their grandchildren think in 100, 200 years' time of our actions today. And it's about activism, and it's about extreme responses, positive and negative, to climate change. And I quite enjoyed it. Again, a little bit dry sometimes, Mr. Robinson, but I thought it was pretty good. Next, another one that I've read but can't put my hand on a copy, and that's Stories of Your Life and Other Stories by Ted Chiang, which is primarily known for containing the short story / short novella that went on to become the movie Arrival, with its timey-wimey, backwards-moving plot that I really enjoyed. Next is Under the Skin by Michael Faber, and this is a story of a beautiful alien errand runner who's effectively collecting meat for the larder for her alien masters. And more than that, I don't know. I haven't actually read it. This is the UK first edition in Canongate Books, and it's got a rather sort of translucent, almost opaque cover on it, but which is sort of slightly disturbingly flesh-toned. And then underneath the covers, under the skin, is the book itself. At number 43 is Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This one is about a four-person team. I don't know if person is the right word in this context. A four-person special forces team made up of a 9-foot dog, Rex, who's a dog bioform, and then with Honey the bear, Bees, who's a distributed intelligence, and with a dragon, who's a kind of mongrel reptile sniper. And it's initially pretty straightforward tale of these guys in combat, and pretty intimidating they are too, and then goes on to consider whether or not they're really the good guys here, and should they be doing what they've been asked to do, even if that does mean that they're a good boy. So quite simple in some respects, but I thought quite thought-provoking. I liked it. Number 42 is a more recent book that I haven't read and don't own a copy of, and that's The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, which I gather is, at least to start with, a somewhat alternate telling of the space race. And at number 41 is Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, which was huge about 10 years ago, and the first of what eventually became a 4 or 5 book series. But this is the first. This tells the tale of Breck, who's a human manifestation of a destroyed immense starship. She's stranded and trying to figure out what's happened to her ship and ultimately to take her revenge. Quite a lot of tea drinking in that one, as I recall. Number 40 is Cage of Souls by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I have read and very much enjoyed, but do not have a copy of. I'm coveting the hardcover edition of that, which is really expensive. It must have had a very short print run. I've been trying to encourage the Broken Binding to issue a special edition, which I would certainly buy if they did. Cage of Souls tells the tale of a youngish lad lives in the far, far future in a time, in a climate and ecologically ravaged world in the final city, Chandrapar, I think it's called. But I could be confusing that with an entirely different book I can't remember. But anyway, he lives in this city and he gets banged up in the Cage of Souls, which is the nickname for a prison several miles upriver. And he gets banged up with a bunch of ne'er-do-wells and criminals and other political prisoners. And it's a tale of his forming friendships and relationships with the people in this prison, some of them warders, some of them fellow prisoners, and their ultimate escape. And then quite a lot about this final city on the planet and its true purpose and some of the relics there and what they might mean. I really enjoyed it. In at number 39 is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, who was the author also of Station 11. And I've read Station 11, but I haven't read Sea of Tranquility. It's had a couple of near misses with my Decision Dice of Destiny, but I haven't yet read it. I think it's a time hopping. I don't know if it's time travel exactly, but it certainly hops around time periods, but it's based around a colony on the moon, if I understand correctly. Number 38 is Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, and this is the first book in the Sun Eater series, which has gone on for quite some length, and book 7 of which has only recently come out. I'm just about halfway through reading that, actually. Empire of Silence, I lapped up. I loved it. It was just what I needed at the time. It's a science fantasy, I suppose you can call it, following Hadrian Marlowe, who's a bit of a self-indulgent, melodramatic youth at the beginning of this book, and goes through a bit of a baptism of fire after he runs away, having decided that he didn't like the destiny that his father had in mind for him. And he gets caught up in all sorts of shenanigans, including ended up being a gladiator, making a bunch of friends that go on to be the central part of his what later becomes a regiment, I suppose, or battalion in the Emperor's forces. Really, really good. And, a bit of innocent popcorn fun. I liked it. Number 37 is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, and I have not read it, and I probably should. My science fiction education is probably incomplete. It's slightly intimidatingly large, and there's another. This is just parts 1 and 2, and there's a part 3 as well. The near magical world that Murakami conjures seems real and tangible, and that's due to his gifts as a writer, apparently. And number 36 is The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, and this is a tale of climate change and and food shortages. And it's set in quite a different Bangkok, and you've got the mix of the ancient with the royal family and the ancient buildings and palaces, and the new kind of cyberpunky. Or gene punky, biopunky, I suppose is the right word. There are genetically resurrected, megalithic animals that are used for crowd control, amongst other things. And there's gangsters, and then there are ravening Western corporations who control food resources around the world. And Thailand is a bit of an exception because long ago they took the decision not to go down the genetically modified route that the rest of the world has done, with some pretty horrific consequences for them. But for Thailand, they've managed to maintain what's effectively an organic approach to farming with some rigorous controls in place to make sure that that's sustainable. But I really love the world building in this. I thought it was really great. Number 35 is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, and I think I'm right in saying this is the second book in the Red Rising series. I've only read the first one. Somebody very kindly bought me the first 5 books. And I enjoyed the first one up to a point. I did think it was a little bit young adult, although it was quite violent in places, and a little bit paint by numbers from a writing perspective. It's probably a bit unfair. But I gather that the writing improves over the duration of the series, and the stakes get higher and the plot thickens, as it were. So I really must read on, but I haven't yet read this one. I'm actually a little bit surprised by how many of these I haven't read. In the overall top 75, I did pretty well. I think I'd read all but about 10 of them, but I feel like I'm I'm a bit gapped in my 21st century reading, just judging by the results of this so far. Anyway, at number 34 is Demon in White by Christopher Rocchio. Again, this is book 3 in the Sun Eater series. And I'm actually a bit surprised that the second book hasn't appeared as well, because I actually prefer, whilst I enjoyed all of the first 3, I think Howling Dark just edged the other 2 by a nose. But the pace continues, the stakes get higher, and the carnage gets even greater in the third book. Again, it's still good fun at this point. I did find that the latest books in the series got increasingly patchy, but certainly the first 3 I really enjoyed. This was great. Number 33 is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And is it? Yeah. And I think I've read this. Maybe I'm getting it confused with the movie, but this is a tale of some students, let's call them, at a remote private school, and the relationships between them and their dawning realization of their purpose in life. And I shall say no more if you haven't read it. And number 32 is Exhalation by Ted Chiang, which I'm absolutely certain we've got a copy of somewhere in the house, but it doesn't seem to be on my shelves, and I'm a bit suspicious that my wife might have pinched it. But anyway, that's a short story collection that I don't think I've read. At number 31, though, is All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Neville. And this is an end-of-the-world horror story romp. I don't know, Day of the Triffids meets your worst gothic nightmare. In All the Fiends of Hell, at the very beginning of the book, there are red streaks in the sky. People that see them literally get sucked up into the sky and never to be seen again. And the only people that are left are those that were unconscious at the time that this happened, kind of echoes of Day of the Triffids there, or were too ill to go out, or were blind. And so the people that are left are infirm in one way or another quite often, although handily there was a flu epidemic going around at the time. So there were quite a lot of people that were unconscious at the time. But anyway, the world having been depopulated to a very large extent, there are now dimly seen alien presences, although the people there don't know that yet, although they've had quite a lot of clues in the sky, I suppose, and it's a tale of one man who's a bit hopeless, and he gangs up with rather opinionated chap who is one of these overconfident people that believes they know the answers to everything but actually don't, and then 2 young kids who I think it's 2, a brother and sister, who are on their own, and he rather inadequately tries to look after them. And so this is the tale of them fleeing as a group across the southwest of England, attempting to find sanctuary on the coast, and maybe a boat to get the hell out of Dodge, all the while pursued by the increasingly visible, increasingly ravening alien beasts. And it's quite a trip, and I devoured it in a matter of hours. I loved it. And number 30 is Remainder by Tom McCarthy, which I suppose we can probably best describe as a mainstream novel with science fiction trimmings, I think what's often known as a slipstream. A darkly comic meditation on memory, identity and history. Remainder is a parable for modern times, apparently, but I have not read it. But I should, I gather, right? It's meant to be good. And then from the sublime to the ridiculous, perhaps, is number 29 is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is the first of the Red Rising series, and this is the one that I have read. It was fun, but pretty not one that particularly lingered in the mind, and I wasn't sufficiently compelled to read on, although I will at some point, to book 2 of the series. Next at number 28, a book that I have read but which didn't survive a shelf cull earlier in the year, and that's Wool by Hugh Howey, which I think is the first, but possibly not, I think it is, of the Silo books, which went on to form a pretty successful TV series. And it's set in a future, an indeterminate number of years away, in which the entire world seemingly lives in a silo of vertical city, and the exact nature of that becomes clear over time, and there are other revelations about the surrounding countryside, and ultimately the reasons why the silos exist in the first place, and why there are people living in them. And number 27 is Flink's Transcendent, which is I think a fairly recent book in the Pip and Flink series, which Alan Dean Foster kicked off, I think, in the 70s. And I've read the first one, I think, the Tarine Krang, but I haven't read any of the others, and certainly haven't read this one. At number 26 is Embassy Town by China Mieville, and this I have read, and this is a story about the ultimate futility of attempting to communicate with aliens whose brains and thought processes are so completely, alien to ours. And I thought that the way that he teased that out in this book was really fantastic. I had a great time. I generally do appreciate his work, but this one is possibly among my favourites of his so far. Number 25, bang up to date with This Is How You Lose the Time War by, Amal El Mokhtar and Gladstone. And this is a book I only recently acquired and I haven't got around to reading yet, but it's a time travel story with two counterpointing plot threads going in opposite directions. I think people leaving notes for each other over time. Opposite sides. And number 24, just over halfway, is Pushing Ice by Alistair Reynolds. And this is a story of a pretty hurriedly put together mission to try to figure out why, I think it's a moon of Jupiter, suddenly disappears and races out of the solar system. And they play catch up for a while and have to make some difficult decisions about whether they've got enough fuel to get back if they want to, or whether they should push on and just commit. And then they end up being, at the risk of spoilers here, they end up stranded on said moon and having to make a kind of hard scrabble existence there with just the resources they have available to them. And then the scope of the story expands even further, and I shall leave it there, but it's really good. Number 23, talking of China medieval, is The City and the City, and this is a tale of two cities which are physically contiguous. So they're not in parallel universes, but the cities exist in the same space. And they could be, in adjoining buildings, or they could share streets, and people could work in one and not the other. But the fact that they're separate is only achieved by kind of cultural and sociological pressure. So people are conditioned not to see the city that isn't their city. And it's a story of division and social control. And there's a body who called Breach, which manages breaches of that social conditioning. So if people either travel between one and the other, or see it, or make a mistake, then Breach takes a very, very dim view of that entirely. And it's a sort of meditation on ultimately homelessness, people that we walk past without seeing, despite them being in plain sight. And it's much the same kind of notion that social conditioning can really dictate what we're able to see. At number 22 is 11/22/63, which is Stephen King's time travel novel, which posits the question, if you could go back in time and save John F. Kennedy from being assassinated, would you? And what would be the implications of that? And it follows one guy who, by circuitous means, finds a route back to the late 1950s, and he effectively builds a new life back in that day, and then has to make some, again, difficult decisions about the extent to which he intervenes, and then has to live with the consequences of that one way or another. Chock full of timey-wimey goodness. Sitting just outside the top 20 at 21 is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, and this is the first and only appearance of a book from The Expanse in this top 50, as far as I can tell. And this is the opener, so this has got some kind of noir detective overtones, and it's where we're introduced to James Holden and what becomes the crew of the Rocinante. We're introduced to the Rocinante, for that matter, and I think I'm right in saying ultimately to the Ring, which becomes central to the plot for the remaining novels. And it's good, slightly schlocky space opera fun. Nothing wrong with that. It's a popcorn entertainment, and I liked it. So into the top 20, and we start with the first 15 lives of Harry August by Claire North, and this is a book I read a year or two back and absolutely loved, and I still think about it now. It's lingered in my mind, and this tells the story of a young lad, and he is reincarnated along with several other people around the world, reincarnated every time he dies as himself. So he gets to live the same life again and again and again. It doesn't pan out in exactly the same way each time, but he's reborn as himself as a baby, and then remembers everything from his past lives. And it's excellent, and lots of not time travel-y stuff, but kind of time loopy stuff. It's like Groundhog Day on a large scale, and I found that really messed with my head. And as I said, it's lingered, in particular, one or two of the aspects of the book with me for all that time since I read it. I really loved it. At number 19 is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which I'm ashamed to say I haven't read. I have seen the movie, but I only dimly remember it, so I can't really tell you much about this one, I'm afraid. But that's at number 19. At number 18, another book from 2025 is Shroud by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this I've read, and I really enjoyed it. I do think Adrian Tchaikovsky shines when he's describing alien ecosystems or unusual ecosystems, and this one's pretty unusual. A two-person crew is stranded. They're on a survey team. They're stranded on a moon in an ill-advised attempt to find out what's going on the surface, and then they can't get off it. And it's a tale of... And again, a bit like Embassy Town, but with a completely different plotline. The difficulties of communicating with a completely alien being and their different thought processes, and that's quite the way that he highlights those differences is quite well done in this book. And it's the story of these two and their attempts to get off the planet with a little bit of assistance from the locals, let's just say. I thought it was really good. At number 17 is Chasm City by Alistair Reynolds again. And this is one of the Revelation Space books. And although it's not really considered to be part of the main sequence, and you can probably read it on its own, I think it fits in quite neatly into the first few books. There are links, clear links from this to at least two of the original three Revelation Space books. And I think it works really well as part of that overall set. I mean, you can read it on its own and it's fine, but I think it works best as part of that overall sequence. At number 16 is Old Man's War, which I've read, but I recall very little about it. I read it a number of years back. But from what I remember, an old boy does a deal with the government, and in return for military service, he's given a much younger body. So there's an old head on young shoulders, and he gets into combat. And there's a bunch of books that follow this in the series, and I think the fifth or sixth one of those that only recently came out, but I've only read the first one. So you can let me know if I'm missing out. But number 15 is The Carpet Makers by Andreas Eschbach, and this was originally written in German and translated a number of years later into English. So I think actually the book first came out in the 1990s in the original German. Let's see, 95, but it wasn't published in English until 2005, so I'm going to count it as 21st century for that reason. And this tells the tale of the carpet makers and the reasons for the carpet making and the scale of the carpet making and the purpose of it and how it all fits together. I think is done really excellently well, and starting small and then expanding and expanding and expanding in its scope and scale as the story continues. It's told in relatively short vignettes. They each tell a tale of people that are linked in some way across the years and across space and time. Really good. A very intriguing premise for a story. At number 14 is Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, the first of the Southern Reach books. And this is the only one of those that I've actually read, but it was years ago, and I don't remember a great deal about it, other than there's an all-woman team that's sent into a zone of strangeness and who tries to figure out what happened to a previous mission and try to understand and get further than the missions that have gone before them, with mixed success, let's say. At number 13 is the first of a double bill from Neil Stephenson, and this is Seven Eves, and among my favourite books. The last time I did a top 10 of my favourite science fiction books. And this tells a story pretty bluntly on almost the opening sentence. The moon falls apart, and that has some serious consequences for those on Earth. And it's a story of a sort of bootstrapped mission to expand the International Space Station so that it can take at least a couple of thousand people out of harm's way, and then what happens to those couple of thousand people, and what happens to the people on the surface? Nothing good for the most part. And then the final third of the book, slightly controversially, not everyone likes that. There's a skip forward 5,000 years into the future, and it tells a tale of what became of the descendants of that International Space Station crew. And I actually enjoyed that part of the book. I mean, it effectively functions as an almost entirely separate section of the book, although it does carry forward some of the divisions from the first, let's say. But it's one of my favourites. I've read it a number of times. Despite its girth, I find it quite easy to read. It's an exciting book. I like it. Arguably a little more cerebral, from Neil Stephenson, is Anathem, which tells the tale of on a secondary world somewhere not dissimilar to Earth, but that's gone through cycles of war and destruction, and a little bit like A Canticle for Leibowitz, there is a sort of global network of what are effectively monasteries or cathedrals, in the grounds of which a bunch of people study, and they're there to make sure that we retain knowledge sufficient to rebuild civilization when it inevitably does itself in for some reason. And there's more to it than that, but I really love the world building and the sort of evocative way that Stevenson describes life in these monasteries. And they're not religious, they're entirely secular, but they manifest in quite a quasi-religious way, and I really appreciated that. And then the scope of it kind of blows up in the final third of the book again. At number 11, slightly to my dismay, is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which I have read and did once have a copy of, but I think it didn't survive a cull of my shelves. Whilst I enjoyed it, primarily for the 1980s nostalgia hit that you get with it, which is right up my alley, it's not particularly well written. And Ready Player Two, the sequel, is apparently utter shite, and I haven't read it. I'm a little bit relieved that this beat Ready Player One, for fuck's sake, into 10th place. It's The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which has more literary value in the first page than Ready Player One does in its entirety, I suggest. This is bleak as fuck. It tells the story of a post-apocalypse scenario, presumably nuclear, but who knows, in the USA, and it tells the story of a father and a boy, and presumably a son, as they make their way across the country, aiming for the coast where they tell is some kind of refuge. It is almost completely hopeless. There is the slightest sliver of hope and humanity at the end to make it worth your while. It's beautifully written and really quite excoriating. With apologies to anyone who's a Cormac McCarthy aficionado. Number 9 is Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton, which is certainly a lot less depressing than The Road. It's the first part of was initially anyway, a 2-part Commonwealth saga, which tells the story of a star that's been hemmed in by a Dyson sphere, but the Dyson sphere suddenly gets switched off, and what it was hemming in is suddenly able to get out, and that's bad news for humanity and its little empire, apparently. And number 8 is The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu, positing a solution to the Fermi paradox, or why don't we see evidence of aliens? And it's not a positive solution to the Fermi paradox. The reason we don't see them is because everyone's afraid, and it's a concealment strategy. And number 7 is Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan. Not my favourite of his books, but I did enjoy it. And it's a kind of mash-up between a hardcore cyberpunk novel and a detective noir story. And it involves the sending of a dead mercenary to unravel a mystery on Earth. And it's pretty violent, pretty sexy, and, something of a thriller and adrenaline rush, and pretty good, I thought, too. Another double bill by Andy Weir. First of those is at number 6, The Martian, and this tells a tale. You know what the story is. I don't need to tell you about The Martian. Do I? Man stranded on Mars, figures shit out, and gets off with some help from some friends. Then at number 5 is Project Hail Mary, a subsequent book by the same author, of course, which did very well. And there's a movie coming for this one too, which I'm very much looking forward to. And the trailer for the movie gives quite a lot away that the book conceals for quite a lot of the time. A man who considers himself to be inadequate to the task is sent off to go to figure out, far away into the stars, to figure out why Earth, Sun and other stars are dying, and to try to figure out a way to stop it. And it's a rather desperate mission, hence the name Project Hail Mary. And he has a little bit of help, it turns out, from an unusual source. It's a bromance of a rather odd sort. And number 4 is another appearance from Alistair Reynolds, and this time it's Revelation Space, the OG novel from him that came out in the year 2000. And for those of you that are thinking, well, the year 2000 wasn't in the 21st century, that's true, technically speaking, but it begins with a 2, so I'm including it. And this is his debut novel, arguably a little bit dry in tone and maybe not as smoothly flowing as some of his later books, but I still really enjoyed it when I reread it earlier this year, maybe the end of last year, I forget. Very good. And number 3 then is Blind Sight, actually, by Peter Watson. That's in an omnibus edition here called Firefall, which also includes Echopraxia, which I'm surprised to see doesn't also find its way into the top 50. I actually preferred Echopraxia to Blind Sight. I've only read them each once, and I did leave Blind Sight thinking that I probably ought to read it again. So this follows a bunch of post-human misfits that get sent off to the outer reaches of the solar system to investigate an anomaly, and becomes a meditation on the nature of consciousness and sentience. And it contains a rather unusual group of people. Let's leave it there. At number 2 then is House of Suns by Alistair Reynolds, the last of numerous books by him in this top 50, perhaps illustrating his dominance of the space opera genre in the UK at least. Another hard SF story. House of Suns is not in the Revelation Space universe, it's a standalone and follows a family of clones who are engaged in a perambulation of the galaxy, collecting knowledge as they go, and then meeting from time to time to pull that knowledge for sale as a cache of knowledge. And that's how they generate their income. And they meet every now and again, like I say, and 2 of the clones who are travelling together illicitly against the rules are late for that meeting for various reasons. And it's a good thing too, because when they get there, things have gone badly wrong. The meeting has been disrupted. Lots of them have died. And we don't know why that's happened at first. And it's part of their job to figure out what the hell's going on. And it ends up getting quite broad in scope as the book continues. Intergalactic, we might say. So what is number one? Well, it might not surprise you to know that the number one book of the, at least according to the viewers of this channel, from the 21st century so far anyway, is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The clear winner, head and shoulders above the rest. And this is the first of what's ultimately become a little series, I suppose, the fourth one of which is coming out in spring, I think it is, 2026. And of the three that exist at the moment, I think this is the strongest. It tells the story of a terraforming project gone slightly awry, with some dire consequences for the humans when they arrive, expecting to inhabit a planet that's been prepared for them by uplifted monkeys, and instead find hostile uplifted arachnids instead. I don't know if I would put this first, if you were force me to list them, which I won't, but it is very good. I enjoyed it, and it's certainly the best of the three that exist so far. So that is the top 50 of your favourite science fiction books from this century. And I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you think there's anything in particular missing that you're surprised didn't make it. And if you're grumpy because your favourites didn't, then let me know that too. But otherwise, as always, thank you for watching. And until next time, goodbye for now.